Imagine waking up in a world where breakfast doesn't exist, not because you forgot to buy groceries, but because grocery stores, farms, and even villages haven't been invented yet. If you don't find food today, you don't eat today. That was the reality for almost every human who lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Long before cities, kings, and civilizations, our ancestors lived as hunter gatherers. They traveled in small groups, carrying only what they could hold. Every sunrise meant another search for food. Some days were exciting. A successful hunt could feed everyone for days. Other days ended with empty stomachs. Life depended entirely on nature. When the animals moved, people followed. When berries disappeared, they walked to another forest. When rivers dried up, they searched for new water. Nobody stayed in one place for very long. This wasn't because they enjoyed wandering, it was because they had no choice. Back then, humans didn't know how to grow food. Everything they ate already existed in the wild. Their survival depended on understanding nature better than any other animal. They could recognize hundreds of edible plants. They knew which berries were poisonous. They tracked animals by tiny footprints in the mud. They understood the seasons, the stars, and the weather. For thousands of generations, this lifestyle worked. In fact, many scientists believe hunter-gatherers often had more varied diets than the first farmers who came later. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The Earth itself began to change. The last ice age slowly came to an end. Massive glaciers melted. Temperatures rose. Rainfall patterns shifted. Forests spread into lands that had once been frozen. Across parts of the Middle East, wild grasses began growing in huge numbers. These grasses looked ordinary, but hidden inside them were tiny seeds, the ancestors of modern wheat and barley. To hungry humans, they were simply another source of food. No one could have imagined that these tiny seeds would eventually reshape the entire planet. The invention that transformed humanity didn't begin with a king, or a brilliant inventor, or a powerful empire. It began with something so small that most people would have ignored it. A single seed. And that tiny seed was about to change human history forever. For thousands of years, humans collected wild grains without ever thinking about growing them. During harvest season, families used sharp stone blades to cut tall grasses filled with seeds. They gathered the grains into woven baskets and carried them back to their camps. Unlike meat, these seeds could be stored for weeks or even months. That made them one of the most valuable foods on earth. But one day, something unexpected happened. As people carried baskets of grain, some seeds spilled onto the ground near their camps. Nobody paid attention. The group eventually moved on, following animals and fresh sources of food. Months later, when they returned to the same area, they noticed something strange. New plants were growing exactly where the seeds had fallen. At first, it probably seemed like a coincidence, but the same thing happened again and again. Slowly, people began connecting the dots. Seeds placed in the ground could grow into new plants. It sounds obvious today, but at the time, it was one of the greatest discoveries in human history. Curious families started experimenting. They scattered seeds near rivers where the soil stayed moist. Some planted them in open fields with plenty of sunlight. Many experiments failed. Birds ate the seeds before they could grow. Heavy rain washed them away. Dry weather killed the young plants. Wild animals trampled entire patches overnight. Growing food was far more difficult than simply collecting it. Yet humans refused to give up. Every failed harvest taught them something new. They discovered that larger seeds often produce stronger plants. They learned that removing weeds helped crops survive. They realized that planting at the right season made an enormous difference. Without knowing it, these early farmers were changing the plants themselves. Each year, they saved the biggest and healthiest seeds for the next planting season. Over hundreds of generations, wild grasses slowly evolved into crops with larger grains that were easier to harvest. This process is called domestication. Humans weren't just adapting to nature anymore. Nature was adapting to humans. For the first time in history, people had discovered that food didn't always have to be found. It could be created. That single idea changed everything. Soon, a question that had never existed before began spreading from family to family. If we can grow our own food, why do we keep wandering? That simple question changed the course of history. Why keep wandering if we can grow our own food? For countless generations, humans had followed animals across forests, mountains, and rivers. Home wasn't a place. It was wherever the group stopped for the night. But farming demanded something completely different. Seeds needed weeks, sometimes months, before they were ready to harvest. If people walked away, all their hard work would be wasted. So, For the first time in human history, some families decided to stay in one place. It was a risky decision. If the crops failed, there was no backup plan, no wild herds to follow, no guarantee that another harvest would come. Everything depended on the small green plants growing in front of them. To protect their food, people began building simple homes from mud, wood, and stone. These weren't temporary shelters, they were permanent houses. Nearby, they built storage buildings called granaries to keep grain dry and safe from rain, insects, and hungry animals. For the first time, humans could save food for the future instead of eating everything immediately. This changed the way people thought. Instead of surviving one day at a time, they began planning months and even years ahead. But crops alone weren't enough. Fields attracted wild goats, sheep, and pigs searching for food. Instead of hunting every animal they found, some people tried something new. They kept the youngest and calmest animals alive. They fed them, protected them from predators, and allowed them to breed. Over many generations, these animals became less aggressive and more comfortable around humans. This was the beginning of animal domestication. Goats provided milk, sheep produced wool for clothing, cattle became powerful workers, helping pull heavy loads and plow fields. Animals were no longer just something to hunt, they became partners in survival. As harvests became larger, villages grew. More food meant more people. Families that once consisted of a few dozen members expanded into communities of hundreds. Soon, not everyone needed to spend their day growing food. Some people became potters, making jars to store grain. Others crafted stronger stone tools. Some built houses. Others traded with neighboring villages. For the first time, people could specialize in different jobs. It was the beginning of a new kind of society. But as villages grew larger, so did their problems. Land became valuable. Water became precious. And before long, people began arguing over something their ancestors had never fought for. Who owned the fields? Those small farming villages were about to become the world's first civilizations. And with them came both incredible progress and unexpected conflict. As the years passed, farming spread from one village to another. Children grew up learning how to plant seeds, harvest crops, and care for animals. What had once been a strange experiment slowly became a way of life. Villages expanded into towns. Towns became cities. And for the first time in history, thousands of people lived together in one place. But feeding a city wasn't easy. Farmers had to produce far more food than their own families could eat. The extra harvest fed builders, craftsmen, soldiers, and leaders, people who no longer needed to grow food themselves. This created something completely new. Specialized professions. Blacksmiths forged stronger tools. Potters made jars to store grain. Carpenters built larger homes. Merchants traveled between settlements, exchanging food for stone, metals, wood, and other valuable goods. Trade connected people who had never met before. Ideas traveled with the traders. New farming methods spread from village to village. Knowledge began moving faster than ever. Soon, another problem appeared. How could people remember how much grain was stored? Who had paid their taxes? Who owned which fields? Trying to remember everything became impossible, so humans invented one of the greatest tools in history: writing. The earliest known writing wasn't created to tell stories or write books. It was used to record harvests, count animals, and keep track of trade. Simple symbols scratched into clay tablets helped rulers organize growing communities. As farming improved, civilizations flourished. Along the banks of the Nile River, ancient Egyptians grew enough food to support massive cities and build enormous pyramids. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia became home to some of the world's first cities. In the Indus Valley, carefully planned towns with advanced drainage systems appeared. In China, farmers cultivated millet and later rice, supporting powerful kingdoms. Different civilizations, different cultures, but they all shared one thing: they depended on farming. Without reliable harvests, these great civilizations could never have existed. The temples, the palaces, the armies, the inventions, even the first written laws, all of them were built on the foundation of agriculture. A tiny seed had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. But farming wasn't a perfect invention. In many ways, it made human life harder. And the price our ancestors paid for civilization was much higher than most people realize. Farming gave humans something they had never truly had before: a reliable food supply. But every great invention comes with a price, and farming was no exception. Before agriculture, small groups of hunter-gatherers rarely stayed in one place for long. If food became scarce, they simply moved on. But farmers couldn't do that. Their crops were rooted in the ground. Their homes were built from stone and mud. Their lives depended on protecting the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. For the first time in history, land became something worth owning. And if land could be owned, it could also be stolen. Villages that had once traded peacefully sometimes fought over fertile fields, rivers, and grazing land. Simple disputes grew into organized battles. As settlements became larger, leaders emerged to protect them. Some became chiefs, others became kings. Armies were formed, walls were built around cities. Farming didn't invent war, but it gave people something valuable enough to fight over. There was another hidden cost. Living close together with hundreds or even thousands of people made it much easier for diseases to spread. Animals lived beside humans. Waste collected near homes. Clean water became harder to find. Illnesses that once disappeared with wandering groups could now move rapidly through entire villages. Ancient skeletons also reveal another surprise. Many early farmers were actually shorter and less healthy than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. Why? Because their diets became less varied. Instead of eating many different plants, fruits, nuts, fish, and wild animals, many farmers depended heavily on just a few crops like wheat or barley. If a harvest failed because of drought, floods, or insects, entire communities could face starvation. Yet despite all these challenges, people didn't abandon farming. The rewards were simply too great. More food meant more children survived. More people meant more ideas. More ideas led to better tools, stronger homes, larger cities, and incredible inventions. Civilization continued to grow. The world our ancestors created was far from perfect, but it laid the foundation for everything that came after. The question is, if farming changed the world so dramatically, how much of your life today still depends on a decision made by people over 10,000 years ago? The answer is, almost everything. Take a moment to look around you. The food in your kitchen, the clothes you wear, the cities you live in, the roads you travel, even the phone you're watching this video on. In one way or another, they all trace their story back to a single moment in human history. The moment our ancestors stopped asking, where can we find food, and started asking, what if we grow it ourselves? That small change transformed everything. As farming spread across continents, humans learned to grow different crops suited to different climates. Rice became the foundation of life across much of Asia. Maize, or corn, transformed societies in the Americas. Potatoes helped feed millions in the Andes before spreading around the world. Across Africa, crops such as sorghum and millet supported thriving communities. Although these discoveries happened independently in different parts of the world, they all followed the same remarkable idea. Instead of depending entirely on nature, humans could work with nature. Over thousands of years, better farming techniques produced larger harvests. People dug canals to carry water to dry fields. They developed stronger tools. They learned to rotate crops and improve the soil. Every generation built on the knowledge of the one before it. Eventually, agriculture produced enough food to support inventors, scientists, artists, teachers, engineers, and explorers. Without farmers growing food, everyone would have been forced to spend every day searching for their next meal. There would have been little time to invent, discover, or create. The modern world exists because someone had enough food left over to do something other than survive. Today, billions of people eat food grown on farms every single day. It's so ordinary that we rarely stop to think about it. But every loaf of bread, every bowl of rice, every apple, every vegetable is part of a story that began more than 10,000 years ago with a handful of wild seeds and a curious human mind. The invention of farming wasn't a single event. No one woke up one morning and declared, "Today, we invent agriculture." It was a slow process of observation, patience, trial, and error. Thousands of unknown men, women, and children contributed to it over countless generations. History remembers the names of kings, conquerors, and emperors, but it doesn't remember the name of the first person who planted a seed on purpose. Yet that unknown farmer may have changed the world more than any king ever could. Because of that one decision, villages became cities. Cities became civilizations. Civilizations built the world we know today. The next time you sit down to eat, remember this. You're taking part in a tradition that began thousands of years before the pyramids, before the Roman Empire, and before written history itself. All because someone looked at a tiny seed and imagined a different future. If you enjoyed this journey into the origins of humanity, subscribe for more stories about the inventions, discoveries, and forgotten moments that shaped our world, because every ordinary thing around us has an extraordinary beginning.